Hello and welcome to The Meaningful Life. I'm Alexa.
And I'm Sam. On this show, we explore the big ideas from philosophy, literature, and psychology that help us understand how to live a better, more purposeful life.
And today we are diving into one of the most profound and influential books of the 20th century, a book born from unimaginable suffering, yet one that offers a timeless message of hope. Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning.
This isn't an easy book to read, but it's an essential one. It's part Holocaust memoir, part psychological treatise. Frankl doesn't just tell us what happened to him in the concentration camps. He explains how the human mind can find a reason to go on even in the most brutal conditions imaginable.
The central quote, the one that everything else revolves around, is from the philosopher Nietzsche. He who has a why to live for can bear almost any how. Frankl's entire experience in the camps was a brutal, real-world test of that idea, and his conclusion was that it is absolutely true.
So today, we're going to walk through Frankl's story. We'll talk about his background, the horrific reality of the camps, the psychological stages he observed, and finally, the therapeutic philosophy he developed from this experience, logotherapy.
And we'll be asking ourselves, how can we apply these lessons forged in the absolute extreme to our own everyday challenges and struggles?
Let's get into it. Part 1. The man before the camps. So, to understand the depth of Frankl's insights, we need to understand who he was before the camps. He wasn't just any prisoner. He was a trained psychiatrist and neurologist with a keen analytical mind. He was born in 1905 in Vienna, Austria.
And even as a young man, he was obsessed with meaning. There's a famous story from his high school years. His science teacher declared to the class that life was essentially nothing but a combustion process, a complex oxidation process. Young Victor jumped out of his chair and asked, "If this is so, then what meaning does life have?"
He was already asking the big questions. He went on to study medicine and specialized in psychiatry and neurology. In the years before the war, he was actually developing his own school of psychotherapy, which would later become logotherapy, focused on the search for meaning.
And he was also deeply influenced by Freud and Adler, but he began to diverge from them. While Freud focused on the will to pleasure and Adler on the will to power, Frankl started to formulate the idea of the will to meaning, the fundamental human drive to find purpose.
So by the time 1942 rolled around, he was a successful doctor in Vienna with a young wife, Tilly, and a promising career. But he was Jewish, and the Nazi threat was closing in. He actually had an opportunity to escape. He had a visa to America.
This is a crucial moment. He was at the visa office, and he saw a piece of marble on the desk. He asked about it, and the official told him it was from a synagogue that the Nazis had destroyed. In that moment, he felt a profound sense of responsibility. He couldn't leave his elderly parents. He decided to let his visa lapse and stay in Vienna.
He chose meaning, his duty to his family, over personal safety. Shortly after, in September 1942, he, his wife, and his parents were all deported. They were first sent to Theresienstadt ghetto. He would eventually be moved to Auschwitz, then Kaufering, and finally to Turkheim, subcamps of the Dachau network.
And tragically, he would be the only one in his immediate family to survive. His father died of starvation and pneumonia in Theresienstadt. His mother was murdered in the gas chambers of Auschwitz. And his beloved wife, Tilly, died of starvation and illness in the Bergen-Belsen camp.
He entered the camps as a doctor, a husband, a son. He would be stripped of all of that. But he took with him his most important tool, his observing psychiatric mind. He made a decision, a profound one, to psychologically detach himself from the horrors and to study them, as if he was both a subject and the scientist.
He later wrote that this was his way of surviving. He said, "I had to struggle to regain my scientific objectivity." He began to see the camp not just as a place of suffering, but as a vast, horrific laboratory of the human mind under ultimate duress.
And that perspective is what gives his book its unique and enduring power. It's not just a memoir, it's a clinical case study of the human spirit.
The arrival, stripping away the self. So let's set the scene for the arrival. Frankl and hundreds of others are crammed into a cattle car for days, with no food, little water, no idea where they're going. The first election happens right on the platform.
This is the moment of initial shock, the first phase of the prisoner's psychological reaction. The infamous Dr. Mengele, or another SS officer, stands with a baton pointing left or right. A single flick of the wrist decides life or immediate death.
Frankl describes the sheer chaos and terror. People are separated from their wives, their children. They have no time to process. He's directed to the left, the line for those who are, for now, fit to work. The others, the elderly, the sick, the children, are sent to the right, told they're going to a rest camp. They are, of course, being sent directly to the gas chambers.
And then begins the process of systematic dehumanization. This is a core theme in the book. The goal of the camp system was to break a person's identity, to reduce them to a number, a mere unit of labor to be expended.
They are stripped naked. All their personal belongings are taken. Wedding rings, family photos, letters, clothes. Everything that connects them to their former life is gone in an instant.
They are shaved completely, head, body, everything. They are disinfected and showered under freezing water, and then they are given the ragged, striped uniform of the prisoner. And finally, they are tattooed. Frankl's number was 119104. From that moment on, that is who he was. The guards would only refer to them by number. They had no name, no profession, no past. They were a number. As Frankl writes, it was not only the loss of a home, of a way of life, but the loss of one's very self.
And this is where we see the first application of his philosophy. In the face of this total erasure of identity, some men collapsed immediately. They gave up. But others, like Frankl, had to find a way to hold on to an inner world, an inner self that the SS couldn't touch.
He talks about this. He would mentally reconstruct the manuscript of a book he was working on before his arrest. The Nazis had destroyed the physical manuscript when they arrested him. So in his mind, on stolen scraps of paper, he would jot down keywords and phrases, desperately trying to preserve his intellectual work. That was his first why. That manuscript was his meaning.
It's incredible. Surrounded by screaming, beatings, and the smell of burning flesh, he is mentally composing a book on psychology. That act of intellectual defiance was his first step toward survival. It was a declaration that his mind was still his own.
The psychology of the camp inmate. The 3 phases. Frankl structures the first part of his book around the 3 distinct psychological phases that a prisoner goes through. The period following admission, the period of entrenchment in camp life, and the period following release and liberation.
Let's dive into each of these. The first phase, as we touched on, is shock. But this shock often began even before arrival on the train. The initial reaction upon arrival, especially after the selection, was a kind of delusional optimism.
Yeah, he calls it the delusion of reprieve. The condemned man, even as he's walking to the gallows, might think, something will happen in the last second to save me. In the camp, new prisoners would cling to the hope that it wasn't as bad as it seemed. Maybe the chimneys aren't what we think they are. This was a protective psychological mechanism.
But that illusion is shattered very, very quickly by the reality of the brutality. The constant beatings, the starvation rations, a piece of bread and some watery soup, the backbreaking labor, the constant threats of arbitrary death. The shock then turns into a kind of numbness, emotional death. Frankl describes it as a strange absence of emotion.
He talks about this. He would see a group of prisoners being forced to watch the hanging of a fellow inmate. He felt nothing. No pity, no horror, nothing. He was so starved, so exhausted, so traumatized that his emotional capacity had simply shut down to preserve energy. He writes, the sufferer's emotional capacity was so deadened that he could not even feel pity for himself.
This leads into the second phase, apathy. This is the phase of relative stability, of becoming a kind of seasoned prisoner, and apathy, Frankl argues, was a necessary and protective shell. It was a blunting of the emotions that was crucial for survival.
If you felt overwhelming grief every time a friend died, or terror every time you were beaten, you would simply collapse. So the mind builds a wall. You walk past the body of a dead comrade in the mud, and you feel nothing. You step over them. Your world shrinks to the most primitive, animalistic concerns: food, warmth, avoiding the capo's whip.
And who were the capos? This is a key point Frankl makes. The capos were prisoners themselves, often criminals who were chosen by the SS to oversee the other prisoners. They were given extra food, privileges, and power, and many of them were more brutal than applying Frankl's lessons to our lives. So Sam, how do we take these lessons forged in the absolute extreme and apply them to our own comparatively mundane struggles? Because most of us will never face anything remotely like a concentration camp, but we all face suffering, loss, and the search for meaning.
I think the first and most important application is the concept of attitude, Frankl's ultimate freedom. We all have circumstances we can't control: a difficult diagnosis, a job loss, a painful breakup, a global pandemic. We can't always choose what happens to us, but we always have a choice in how we respond.
It's about moving from a passive mindset, why is this happening to me, to an active one, what is this asking of me? How will I respond? What can I learn from this? It's about taking ownership of our inner world.
Exactly. The second application is to actively cultivate our why. Frankl suggests that we shouldn't ask what we expect from life, but rather what life expects from us. Our meaning is found in answering that question through our responsibilities, our work, and our relationships.
We can do a meaning audit on our lives. Are we engaged in work that feels purposeful? Are we nurturing loving relationships? And when suffering comes, as it will, can we find a way to see it as a challenge to be overcome, to grow from, to use to connect with others?
It also teaches us about resilience. Resilience isn't about avoiding suffering. It's about navigating through it with a sense of purpose. The people who are most resilient aren't the ones without problems. They're the ones with a strong why that pulls them through the how.
And finally, it gives us a framework for empathy. When we see someone suffering, we can understand that their deepest need might not be just for the pain to stop, but to find a meaning in it. Sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is help someone find their why.
Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning is a testament to the human spirit's incredible capacity to find light in the deepest darkness. It is a challenging, heartbreaking, but ultimately hopeful book.
He concludes with this powerful idea. Our greatest freedom is the freedom to choose our attitude. No matter what life throws at us, that freedom can never be taken away. It is our ultimate source of meaning and strength.
So what's your why? It's a question worth asking every single day.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into a truly meaningful life. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with someone you think would appreciate it. And don't forget, subscribe my channel.
Until next time, keep searching.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.